had 46 sections, no schedules. Then Income Tax Act 1922, about 105, 110 sections, no schedules. Income Tax Act 1961, about 591 sections, 11 to 14 schedules, depending on which point of time you're there. 5 million words. Now come to this new bill. 40% reduction. I think about 360, 370 odd sections. 14 schedules. 2.62 million words. So this is the chopping of the dead wood. Is this simplicity? Is this elegance? One part of that. Second, I'll come to the 12th Law Commission, headed by the very famous MC Setalvad, former Attorney General and Law Commission Chairman. He was talking of the 1922 bill with 105 sections. He said it is one of the worst, most complex legislation in India. Why is it complex? He said 2 reasons. Number 1, too much of deadwood, structure is not proper, and second, frequent amendments. Now today, again the other panelists will talk on this. I'm assuming the structure is right. All the deadwood, everything has been taken away. It's a beautiful, simple act. I'm coming to another question, completely different. In 1503, between 1503 and 1506, Mona Lisa was painted. It's about 500 years. It is still today among the most beautiful paintings in the world. It is a beautiful painting because it was beautiful to start with. Pause there for a moment. For the past 75 years, if every finance minister of France said, I want to beautify Mona Lisa a little, add 1 stroke there, remove something there, it will never be a beautiful painting today. It would have been gone, dead. So income tax bill is one thing. It's probably a beautiful bill, all deadwood gone, but will it be tinkered with? Setalvad said, don't tinker. He gave this report in 1958. Today we need to see whether it will be tinkered with or not. Second thing is clarity. 2 levels of clarity are required. First level of clarity is common person should be able to understand without a legal interpreter nearby. If you can read, common, I don't mean the common person in the Income Tax Act, nobody can understand, not the common man in the street. I'm talking of reasonably literate, legally literate people, law students, for instance. Can a law student read that, or a businessman read the act without the guidance of a lawyer and understand it? That is one level of clarity. Clarity, is it possible to understand for a common person? Then in an Income Tax Act, you have a second level of clarity. Second level of clarity is, can uncommon people misunderstand deliberately? Now, uncommon people are lawyers and auditors. We read something deliberately to misunderstand in favor of our clients. So the simplicity must be such, the clarity must be such that you cannot misunderstand. I am doubtful it will happen, because if you have 2.62 million words, definitely you won't have the second level of clarity. So it's a good journey. I hope we will see more of it as it goes on. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So you have heard one extreme of the views, which will gel with many of you. Let's go to the other extreme. We have Mr. Sujit Ghose, who is going to give you, a different perspective and insight into this bill.
So most of you are students, I assume. How many of you have dabbled with income tax in your course curriculum? Can you just raise your hand? So there are very few people who have. So therefore that makes our task very difficult. You'll be introduced to a subject that you probably have not been exposed thus far. So let me tell you something which I personally feel. If you look at the history of our legislative architecture, we have followed the English or the British drafting style, because that's the hegemony of the past, hangover of the past that we have continued. Now, legislations back then, starting from Lord Macaulay's legislations, the Indian Contract Act 1853, 1872, many of those legislations have survived for over 100 years. And they were as simple as it got to be. Look at Indian Contract Act, it has provisions and it has explanations. It has illustrations through which they try to explain. That legislation has thus far not been questioned as being complex, and it has stood the test of time. And why is it that the Income Tax Act, which came about in 1961, just about 64 years later, we are trying to change it? As learned barrister says, it had to be, what is the need? Are we getting into a simplicity or are we creating a problem for ourselves? 2-3 things are very fundamental, therefore. As interpreters of law, you are used to a certain style of interpretation. Some words have universal meaning. For example, words like notwithstanding, save as otherwise provided. These are all standard drafting language that has been used over periods of time. These kind of languages, some section of the society felt that it is too overwhelming for the common man. Let us therefore, instead of notwithstanding, use words like irrespective. Now, that may be a good idea, but that, in my personal view, that doesn't gel with the concept of legislative drafting. The beauty and essence of a legislative drafting takes a backseat, and it probably becomes more like a white paper. And I don't know whether legislation should be drafted in such a simplistic manner, and the reason for that is very simple. Words and phrases used in legislations, fiscal or commercial or constitutional or any of those things, plenary, have had interpretations by the Supreme Court, very well established. For example, words like reason to believe, reason to suspect. All of those have had a rich jurisprudential meaning ascribed by the Supreme Court. Absent those words, in the name of simplicity, you're going to be driving the legal fraternity, the tax fraternity back into creating new interpretations of those words that have been now introduced. So how far simplicity is going to be actually a simplicity, I have my serious doubts. That's point one. Point two, where it may actually benefit. It is said that, legislative intent, when you read a law, you have to figure out the legislative intent. Legislative intent, as the Supreme Court says, has to be read from what is there in the document and not anywhere else, as the words stand for themselves. Now, if it is very simple, then legislative intent, there will be no room for doubt and no room for ambiguity, and therefore, smart lawyers cannot make a issue out of competing interpretative outcomes that may be there from a given provision. So that's fine. But my larger question is that who is the Income Tax Act meant for? How many businessmen, and I'm asking this question to myself and to all of you, how many businessmen get up early in the morning before they go to their factory or their business place, opens up the Income Tax Act, tries to figure out what it means and then does his business? All of them, without exception, will have specialists looking at their those aspects, because they would like to focus on the core. The core is to earn money, run businesses, manage businesses, and not get dabbled or dazzled by the income tax law. So for whom is this change? So I personally don't believe this is likely to serve any purpose, real purpose. That's point one. Point two, more important, is what is for practitioners. We are used to Section 10 means this. For the last 60 years, people knew 10AA means this, 10BB means this. And the reason why income tax new amendments have always come with an appendix 10A, 10AA, 10AA, BB is that you don't displace the existing provision so that the knowledge and the reference point has always remained the same. Something that was 10 tomorrow becomes 15. It gets very difficult. So that consistency or constancy in the usage of the provisions to convey to the courts or to convey to the tribunals was always sustained. Today, something that was 263 is now 365. Now, God knows how are you going to remember that. It will take another 10 years for the judges to also get into it, and for that matter, the lawyers and the accountants to figure it out. So, disruption is good, but disruption with a purpose should have been there. I am okay with this deadwoods being taken out, but that was easy. You could have just deleted those provisions. There was no need for you to rehash the whole thing. So, my take is that in the name of simplicity, we are creating more difficulty, and the greatest example of that is goods and service tax. In the name of simplicity, it was good and simple tax. Look at where we are after 7 years in goods and service tax. So, not sure whether simplicity is likely to drive much in this context.
Yeah, thank you. Very rightly put, that simplicity is as simple as climbing Mount Everest. That is the toughest job to do. And particularly when it comes to fiscal legislation, it is much tougher. In fact, sir, recently I came across another decision of Supreme Court of India where this manufacture, some of the disputes are still pending. And the definition of manufacture has not settled down, although the law is gone. It is replaced by GST now. Supply. But this concept of manufacture, we could not settle it. So, what Mr. Sujit Ghosh is suggesting that the simplicity is very elusive target, or perhaps it's an illusion. It's a mirage. It cannot be achieved in laws, perhaps. As you rightly put that, the expression notwithstanding being substituted by irrespective of. The high courts and tribunals and Supreme Court will take perhaps a decade to settle that exact meaning and nuance of this expression in particular context. So, similarly, we have one more panelist. Let's hear his view, then we will also take a few queries from you. So, sir, you have the mic. Yeah.
See, you mentioned Everest, right? It's actually easy to climb Everest. You just have to walk up, right? A few obstacles, you have to, fix ropes and, climb up. To navigate a few, to the glacier and the last few meters, you need expert help. But the Income Tax Act is not Everest. It's not there. It's been created, right? So if we are creating something, I think he took the example of Mona Lisa. Sujit mentioned clarity, certainty. And I'm actually with Sujit on this. I don't think we needed this exercise. The Shom committee said you rehaul the tax architecture, you rehaul the tax code, and that has been conveniently ignored. So if all you're doing is relabeling the bottle and reorganizing what is inside the bottle, then it's a pointless exercise. And you didn't just stop at that, you had to go and change phrases. I think any law student, even a second-year law student, will know that if a statute has a notwithstanding clause, then there is a significance to that clause. Here, every section has a notwithstanding clause. And within the same section, there will be two subsections that has a notwithstanding clause, right? So it may be because of the Mona Lisa example that was given earlier, and I think therein lies the problem. So if you break it down to the constant chopping and changing of the Income Tax Act, right? I think I want to put a challenge to our finance minister. Will the finance minister say, for the next 5 years, I will not amend the Income Tax Act? Now that they have come up with the bill, right? Will they say for 5 years, we won't chop and change? Why should the Income Tax Act be changed every year as part of a budget exercise? I can understand fixing rate, changing rate. For that, you don't need to amend the legislation, right? So I think the problem has come from that. And why is that? I think there's a deeper problem. And I read this on the website in the FAQs that apparently some 600,000 hours have been spent, some 150 officers too, in this exercise of the new. And I think that's the problem. One party is interested in the legislation being in the fashion they want it at all times, which is a tax administration. And they're in the business of collecting money. They don't understand that they are collecting money from citizens for the benefit of citizens ultimately, right? So essentially, you are giving a set of officials the right to determine their own powers. And if you split the tax, just take forget about the bill, just take the current act. So there are the charging provisions, and then the majority of the provisions are regarding tax administration, right? Penalty, breach, powers to, appeal, revision, all sorts of things, right? I think if we open up a challenge on simplifying tax administration by simplifying the tax administration provisions of the Income Tax Act, I think we can bring it down to much, much, much less in terms of quantity and clarity. And that leads me to the next point. What is the purpose of this Income Tax Act? And Sujit raised that question. It's to provide certainty and clarity. Clarity we have spoken about, but also certainty. Certainty to whom? Certainty both to the person implementing it, in the officials, and the people who are following it. I want to plan. I want to know if I earn 100 rupees, I want to know how much tax I'm going to pay. And I will organize my affairs accordingly. And that goes to the core of the rule of law. Now, the reason why we see so many chopping and changing and, I think if you take one section, I think we have, AA, RR, God knows, right? You AMZ, whatever, right? So that shows lack of certainty, lack of clarity in the minds of the people who are making the law and implementing it. Then where will the people who are supposed to follow have clarity? And what have you done now? It's not as if you have reduced the sections. You have just renumbered them. And whatever was in language, apparently you're trying to put it in tables. Now, as if you move language in a subsection to a table, does the clarity increase? So the principal objection I have is, I don't think drafting of tax code should be done by the people in charge of implementing the tax code. Their suggestions can be taken. That's why we have legislature, we have executive, and we have the judiciary. Now the legislature has abandoned its job of drafting laws, and that's the problem. So if you give the person who has the power to implement and who wants to collect tax, obviously he wants every section to be in the fashion he wants it to be. So I think there's a lot of problem with it. And I think I'll stop there because I can go on and on, because this is all people have been talking about for the last 15 days since this bill was published. But maybe I think the answer is in Mona Lisa, in certainty, and in Mount Everest.
Thank you. Very rightly put, sir. In fact, certainty is another elusive goal for fiscal legislation, whether it is direct tax or indirect tax. It's impossible. Because for a good number of professionals, practitioners, and even jurists, again, the interpretation. As long as the name of the ball game is interpretation, then different people will interpret differently. And the first victim is going to be certainty. I remember, so in fact, when the king decided to fund their war with France, 100 Years' War, they needed money. And they decided to impose a levy on number of windows a house can have. If you are rich and your house has got 10 windows, then you have to pay higher taxes. If you are middle class or slightly poor, you have just one window. So I came across different, I was studying a modus operandi, how to evade that tax, the window tax. And good number of the princely and the rich, they started, the merging two windows, which they had, so that it is counted as one. And those merger means half of the sunlight going in another bedroom and half going in another one. So they have to pay tax on one window. That was the idea. And that completely baffled and bewildered the tax inspector. How to go about it now? So they had to switch over to a new tax. So certainty, as rightly put, that's very important for any fiscal legislation. It should be very clear in the mind of a taxpayer that what tax liability or incidence of tax falls on my head. I must know that. That itself needs the help of professionals, and the professionals often fall victim to interpretations. There are conflicting decisions by high courts, even Supreme Court benches. Some of the decisions of larger bench being referred to constitution bench. So a lot of issues are involved. The paying taxes, perhaps, for you and me, it is as simple as we will take out our wallet and pay and forget about it, because let's focus on what Sudhit suggested, that core areas. If I'm a businessman, I will focus on business. But as rightly put by both the speakers, rather all three speakers, that unfortunately the architects of this new bill, they happen to be the same set of people. So the fresh ideas could not be injected into it. Then the mandate itself was so limited. Thirdly, the time frame itself was so tight. It was 6 months deadline. And 21,000 suggestions came. I'm pretty sure it will be 21 lakhs perhaps if more time is given. But good number of people, they were not even aware. In fact, only yesterday somebody suggested, sir, you never brought it to my notice. I could have sent my suggestion also. I said, why? It was there in the Government of India's website. It was a newspaper, television, everywhere. But a good number of people, they are busy with their own profession, their own business. Perhaps they did not find time. So 6 months is not sufficient time. So yes, we can talk about it more. In case you want us to continue with more technical debate, we will do that. But before that, I think my panelists will allow me to invite some queries. If you have any question in your mind, you can throw the missile at us and we will try to navigate. Yeah, please. You need a mic or something? There is a mic? Yeah, you are, yes.
This is a very important question. You see, there is no law in the Constitution which says that the legislature needs to consult you. It's a sovereign power, absolute sovereignty on legislative field, no room for consultation. Consultation is, if at all they propose, think of it as a largesse. They may choose not to consult, and you can't use that as a reason to go to a writ court to say that this law is arbitrary. So let's be very clear about that. Yes, in a democratic nation, consultation should happen because stakeholders should be taken in note of. That's the moral aspect of that. But legally speaking, there is no bar. That's one. But the more important thing that you just also raised is that there was no consultation with ICI. But I don't think that is true. Consultation was done. So I'm told. So I've read. I'm not a chartered accountant, but I dabble with chartered accountants a lot. I am told that some of the large stakeholders in the accounting world were consulted. They had submitted their views. May not be all of them, but certainly some of the flexing muscle kind of, a bunch of people. The third, do understand something. Lawmaking is a process in itself. It's a political process. A political process will come with its own rhythm. There are back channels and front channels that happens. That is something that as students of law or as practitioners, we are not aware of. What is posturing? And what is the long-term goal? We don't know. That is all sealed in the chambers of the power that be. So we don't know what is there in their mind. And until the bill becomes an act, maybe too premature. And I was reading somewhere that some statements have been made by the Honorable FM that there will be some rollbacks. For example, I'll give an example. In income tax, there are two processes. One is called a survey, another is called a search. A search is more draconian in the sense that they go and enter your premises to unearth unaccounted income and call out incriminating documents. Now, they have a power under the search provisions, they had a power under the search provision to take your statement under oath. And those statements becomes incriminating and they could be used against you in a proceeding of law. A survey was a more simpler, innocent visit by a tax office to call for information. That's about it. It was a more docile kind of thing where there was no concept of taking statements under oath. In the new bill, as I was reading, because litigations do happen on this survey and search and all those things, right? That's where you go into the propriety of a tax officer's action. It seems that they have introduced the concept of statement under oath in survey as well, which is draconian. In a situation of survey, which is an innocent tax visit, tax officer's visit, to put it under oath, there's a lot of skirmish that has happened. And I'm told some statements have been made by the finance minister that she'll roll it back. So the point I'm making is that stakeholders have already started doing back channel. This is the time to do all of that advocacy, if I will use a more sensible word. Stakeholders and everybody else concerned, use your good offices, use your lobbies, use your center of power, and make those representations. Nothing is lost. Anyway, this bill will go to a standing committee. If you think that it will get passed through immediately, that's not going to happen. A fiscal legislation of this magnitude will not go through by yeas and nays in the parliament. It will go through a standing committee. You will have time. So put up your proposals there.
Yeah. So, sir, even the select committee also, it comprises of mostly the MPs, MLAs, and the politicians. Means when they have formed the select committee, also the professionals or the eminent stakeholders and knowledgeable people
Yes,
have not
you see,
been
select
asked.
committee has already been notified by the Lok
Yes,
Sabha
yes.
Speaker. So there are 31 members. And select committee follows its own proceedings and they invite professional bodies like yours,
Okay, sir.
right, which has perhaps failed to do the job of informing you.
Okay.
Right. And secondly, this a lot of mandate as a voter we have given to our own representative who represent us in Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. Right. It's basically their job to point out drafting error, a lot of issues.
Yeah.
And we are there to guide them, give them, our recommendations, our suggestions, either as an individual, as a citizen, as a professional body, as a law college, as anybody for that matter, who thinks that, even I have a right and a stake in this particular legislation. So, what Sujit is suggesting, that, that's a very unfortunate part, but it's a sovereign power.
Yeah.
As you know that, so far as tax laws are concerned, the Supreme Court itself has given the verdict. The sovereign has the authority to go for the retrospective amendment, and you will find in every budget half a dozen of amendments. We are lucky to have only half so now. Earlier, this used to be in dozens. In one particular finance bill, I counted as many as 54 retrospective amendments. As a professional, you must be aware of
Sir,
it.
even in this year, when the people were saying there
There
was
are
no
few, yes.
86 amendment was there in this budget itself.
Yes. So, there are certain creases there, which needs to be ironed out. But we should not be disappointed. We still have time and we have the right to communicate to the legislature, our representative. Sir, we'll add a few points. Yes.
2 points on constitutionality. You can sit down, please. First thing is legislative competence. You challenge acts in 2 ways. Legislative competence you can't challenge here, this bill. Second way you can challenge is arbitrariness, inconsistency. I'm sure there'll be a lot of challenges open. And as professionals, we should welcome challenges. There'll be a lot of confusion, and we're chasing a mirage, but there'll be a pot of gold if you're chasing a rainbow. So challenges, we have to take it and run. And as the moderator pointed out, Shailendraji, that you still have opportunities to clear the deck, point out your views.
Yeah, so listen, JPC only consists of MPs. So I don't think you should complain about that. I mean, once the bill is tabled in Parliament, then the parliamentary committee only consists of MPs from the Rajya Sabha and the Lok Sabha. So you can't expect outside participation in the JPC. But what the JPCs do, at least the well-functioning JPCs, they normally go across the country. They invite people in each city, experts, trade bodies, professional bodies to come and give suggestions. That happens. Now, it depends on how this JPC functions. Normally, it's left to the chairperson of the JPC to do that. In terms of, the history of parliamentary legislation over the last 40 years doesn't give me any hope about any great debate on this bill in the parliament. From 1950 onwards, it's a downhill slope. Right? The amount of time that Parliament spends on debating legislation, including constitutional amendments, has decreased. So it's not a happy situation there. On constitutionality, both Sujit and Mr. Raghavan have answered. I mean, there's no challenge. I mean, Parliament has the power. Elect better MPs. We can discuss about democracy in some other session. Yeah.
But there is I'm so sorry, I'll just add a point and then you can ask your question. But there is a inherent fear, a problem that I notice as a professional. I've been doing tax for almost 30 years now. In these 30 years, I have noticed a very profound shift of legislature actually abdicating its primary function onto the executive. Today, the central government, the CBDT, the CBEC, the delegates and the executive, if you put it, effectively are controlling the narrative of tax law in India. Now, the danger in that is as follows. The English law has always said that, look, the primary legislative function cannot be abdicated. The dilution of that happened in India through Supreme Court decision to say that no, the legislature is very busy and overburdened. Therefore, let the delegate fill up the gaps. And then from fill up the gaps, it has become fill up the law. So, at a constitutional morality level, I find that legislature has today, in today's context, take indirect taxes law, GST, or the income tax law as it has been happening, is a complete abdication. It's a moral issue for the parliament to stand up and answer. For example, this whole exercise of drafting of the legislation by the officers. And we saw that trend in GST also. When GST was introduced about 7 years back, it was the same central excise officers who were drafting it. Resultant, we had a mockery. We had a mockery, and I'm saying this with full responsibility. We had a mockery for the last 7 years because the legislation was so horribly defective that repeated amendments had to be brought out to make sure that the creases were ironed out. And the same will happen in income tax law. Take my word. The question, therefore, is for us citizens, academicians, to ask the legislatures is how far will you keep on doing this imposition of tax through a subterfuge method of giving it on to the CBDTs and CBCs to decide the policy matters. This is a large question, may not be a forum to have a debate, but at some stage, Shailendraji, you should organize that. We should, look at such difficult questions.
Very rightly put. In fact,
I have one more point. See, look at the Companies Act. This is a trend, as Sujit pointed out. Not just rule making to fill in the gaps in legislation, but rule making power having the right to amend the statute itself. Right? And Companies Act also says in many places. And now the Income Tax Act, the new bill also says. I was reading 533. I just wanted to see whether there's retrospective power, because the CBDT has also been making retrospective rules. I wanted to see whether at least they have removed that. If they're guaranteeing a simple and certain law for foreign investors to come in. I wanted to see at least that. That is also there, still continues. So forget about legislation doing retrospective amendments. Even the CBDT can do retrospective amendments. I mean, it's utter nonsense in lawmaking across the world, right? So, but this is a trend that continues. On the larger problem, we can talk until the cows come home. But the question to ask is, you said, "Oh, I didn't know about this legislation in the works." We should ask, how many MPs knew that this was going to be tabled that morning? Even from the ruling party, forget about the opposition party. So that is the nature of lawmaking in our country, and that's a very serious problem. I think we will move on, otherwise we can talk about this. Yeah.
Sir, my name is Arun. I'm a PhD scholar from Delhi University.
Okay.
And I'm doing
Bring
research
it closer,
on AI-driven justice systems.
Yeah.
So my question is regarding use of AI in this new tax code. So there are two questions. First is, while coming up with this draft bill, and compiling all the suggestions which you got in 6 months, have you used any AI tool to do that, to filter out the suggestions? Second one, sir was mentioning that there are so many sections that alphabets also, they end up and then you are writing KKK multiple times. So have you used any AI tool like Notebook LM, where you can upload any source, doesn't matter, 10,000 sections, 10,000 PDFs, and then you can come up with...
I think you are asking a top secret of Government of India. Don't ask that.
Sir,
See, if anybody has used AI or any other LLM tool...
No, in your office, have you done it? Have you tried?
I wish this job could have been given to us. We could have done a better job.
Okay.
We have not drafted. I think you got us wrong.
Okay.
But yes,
bit later. Thank you.
I'm pretty sure they must have used partly, perhaps, but this is pure speculation like a stock market. So, don't blame us. But this was the last question. Should we wrap it up? Okay.
My comment is, number one, that we have the academics here. I find a large number of students and I believe faculty too. Now this lawmaking as a subject has not been prescribed by the Bar Council. It's not being taught. So that's number one. Secondly, a mention was made about consultative process. Rightly, somebody talked about professional bodies. I don't think, apart from here we are talking of chartered accountants and company secretaries, whether even association of engineers or architects, etc. are consulted. The consultation takes place with certain lobbies. For example, metal manufacturers or automobile associations. So they meet the finance minister and they put up their views with regard to a particular commodity or item or a service. I'm talking about the deficiency, incapacity of lawyers with the process of lawmaking. I've done it in my law college, but it doesn't take place anywhere. Now, we call the parliamentarians as lawmakers. I think that's not quite correct, because people like, I'm just giving an illustrative name, whether it is Hema Malini or Sachin Tendulkar, and very many with criminal background have any notion of lawmaking. So we say parliamentarians or legislators are lawmakers. Well, they are not lawmakers. So that is another thing. Now, mention was made about the standing committee or when will they call for. I've been before a number of such committees. Their functioning is also dominated by the party politics. So, it is theoretically, it may be said that they can devote a greater length of time over a particular legislation. Really, it doesn't happen. Therefore, the point that was made that it is, say, for example, CBDT officers whose job is a particular function with regard to tax administration, they get a free hand to make the laws, and which they are incapable. All these draft legislations, they go to Ministry of Law and Justice, which leaves it to the administrative ministry So they just see whether the title is correct, whether the definition clause is complete, whether short title, long title, and like that. Rule-making power has been assigned to somebody or not. And therefore, the point I'm trying to make that at this point of time, if we have any notion that we would be the third, fourth, fifth economy in the world, this process of lawmaking should be accorded the due importance. And this cannot be left only to the Bar Council. There are, like you may be concerned with the tax, whether it's the Home Ministry, whether it is the Commerce, Health, etc. They all have a role to play in this, which is not being done. Thanks for giving me the opportunity.
Just want to respond to that.
Please.
Admittedly, substantial number of parliamentarians are what you mentioned. But you should also be aware that there are specialist NGO agencies, PRS legislative being one example, who are routinely called by the minister concerned before a legislation emanating from his ministry comes out. Those PRS being an example, they are full of lawyers. They actually help in drafting the legislation. But trust me, all those efforts are in non-fiscal areas. So when the new rape law came about after Justice Verma's directive from the Supreme Court, lawyers were involved. Specialist lawyers were involved in drafting, making suggestions, etc. So it may not be entirely correct that lawyers are far removed, 2 steps removed from the lawmaking. It happens, but not in the fiscal, unfortunately. That's the problem. The problem is, in the fiscal arena, there are no agencies who are actively involved in the lawmaking. It is only the officers, IRS. For some good reasons or bad reasons, the ministry seems to have abdicated completely to them. That's the problem.
Right, sir. So incidentally, the clock is not in our favor, and I'm being threatened from different corners, that I must wind up. So let me thank all of you, and particularly my panelists, for answering all the questions. And so the last observation I will make, that when our polity itself has become so awkward, and when the intrinsic nature of the standing committee or JPC is polity itself, naturally, the output is going to be an offspring of politics, or perhaps geopolitics sometimes. So sir, you cannot expect them to do something non-political. That would be out of their nature. So thank you all for a very patient hearing, and all of you proved to be a wonderful, laudable, admirable, audience. Okay. No, students. Okay. So you have a question, or you have something else?
Actually, sir, I'm very much interested in this, your lecture. So if someone wants to join you, so what is the process?
The process is, I will give you lots of opportunities. You come with me to Mumbai. We are just having another event there.
If you call me, sir, I'm ready to come even today itself. But what is the process?
For today, the boss is somewhere, in different direction. Yeah. Thank you, all of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for such a comprehensive overview of the bill. I think this was a very relevant topic for all of us. I would now like to request the Vidhi Utsav team to present mementos to our speakers.
You are now a veteran at Vidhi Utsav. Yes. And since Shalitaji, you missed the first edition, you are a newcomer, so welcome.
Should we keep it here? Or you know what? Not necessarily.